guys and welcome back. Today I am going to be talking just about the steps that I took to finish this painting. It's been a bit since I've just talked through the process that it takes to work on one of my paintings. So I figure I will do that. Maybe it'll give you some ideas on things that you can do in your own watercolor paintings. There's been some things that I've been trying to explore or cultivate a little bit more in my paintings lately. So right off the bat, I am trying to be friends with masking fluid. I've talked about this a bit in the past, but we're not friends. I've had a lot of difficulties with masking fluid in the past. Lots of issues, from staining the paper to it tearing the paper, or even just like roughening the texture of the paper right where the masking fluid is, so you can see a clear difference between the never covered paper and what I use the masking fluid on, if that makes sense. What other issues? There is the straight up actually tearing of the paper too, which I mentioned, but it's pretty horrific when it actually like rips up your paper. Whatever. Anyways, I'm getting on a tangent here. The point is, there have been many issues that I've had over the past, and I've tried lots of brands. I really want to figure out how to do it. I want to be able to maybe find the right brand and the right technique of peeling it off, whatever, the perfect combination so that I can use it. It really does enhance the process. So if I didn't have all or some of those drawbacks, I would want to use it all the time for everything. So yeah, we're trying it. I've reincorporated it into my workflow. So I masked off the character, and that allowed me to work on the background. That's my biggest favorite thing about masking fluid, is it allows me to get really textured and precise with the way that I let the background form, I guess, with the way that the wet on wet process goes for me, adding in paint and then letting it texturize and watching the pigments granulate and then playing with that as it's still wet. All of those steps are massively easier when I can just go at it, when the character is masked off. How I used to do it, I would not have that masking fluid in the way, so that I would have to go in and then very carefully outline around the character, and then it took a lot more attention to those areas to try to get the level of texture in all places the way that I needed. It was just a lot more babysitting. And I really like being able to use masking fluid. It allows me to get the effect that I want in the background much more consistently. And that just took me a couple of layers to get the richness that I wanted in the background and the texturing. It can depend on the pigments that you're using, whether you want to layer on top of them or not. I find that the ones that are not staining but more easily disrupted by subsequent layers, that can blow out any really nice texture that I have. It can just wash that away. So I try to be very aware of the paints that I'm using and which ones will allow me to layer on top of them. The ones that I used today are pretty transparent. I find that that's one of the components that makes them easier to work on top of. They're transparent and they tend to stain a little bit better. So that allowed me to do several layers and then get that built up look that I want. And then I peeled up the masking fluid. I do know that you want to do it as soon from when you apply it as possible. You really do not want to go over 12 hours or 24 hours. I can't remember. In any case, you don't want to leave it on your paper for an extended period of time. I'm also trying different like angles and techniques of when I peel it off of the paper to try to get it to release without roughening up the paper at all. And I've had some success with being able to control that and have it feel fairly pristine after. So I'm still kind of working on the technique of removing the masking fluid, but that has been a bit of progress made in that regard. So that's exciting and nice. Oh, and I do have this original painting, Pink Heart, available at my shop, so there's a link down in the description that'll take you over there. And she is also the exclusive print for Patreon for all of my patrons in February. So what that means is if you sign up for the print tier by the last day of February, so February 29th, then I will send all of you lovely patrons this print next month. So during the month of March, you'll receive her. So make sure that you sign up by the last day of February though. That's the cutoff date. And yeah, let's get back to painting. And then I started working on the skin. I do this a bit differently than how I used to and how it's normally traditionally taught for watercolors. Usually you start with the lightest values and you work your way to the darkest. I actually really like to establish the place that the character exists in first. So I'll go in and add the background. And part of it too is that the background is often, I should say often for me, just very fun and textural. It gives me a chance to get the muscles moving for me to work with the paint without going to a step that can be a lot more technical and then therefore something that I can mess up easier if I'm not warmed up. So there's a lot of reasons why I like to work on the background first. That's one of them. It gets me into the zone first and I can start to see the painting come together. In fact, I can see it come together very quickly when I put such a large area down very quickly, and it establishes this painting and it puts it in the direction that I'm going. I just really enjoy that. So I started working on her skin and I chose this palette to be very pink leaning. That's kind of the point of this painting. I want it to feel romantic and sweet with the edgy elements that I've included. So her skin tone is much more fantastical and pink based. I used a lot of quinacridone red and is it quinacridone pink? No, it's quinacridone rose. I used those two predominantly for like the base level of her skin, and I also mixed those into the shadow paints that I mixed together so that it had a very consistent warmth throughout. And I had a lot of fun adding in extra rosiness in her cheeks and her fingers. I tend to like to overemphasize those areas that tend to get a little rosier, warmer. So this painting in particular was just well suited to enhance some of those like more blushy tones in the skin. And the shadows ended up being mostly ultramarine blue and the quinacridone rose and quinacridone red mixed together. Quinacridone rose and quinacridone and ultramarine blue. Oh my gosh, there's too many paint names that I'm trying to say at you. Those two together, they actually create the pigment that you can buy pre-mixed from Daniel Smith, which is ultramarine, rose of ultramarine. That's what it's called. And it's one of my favorite paints. It's beautiful. It granulates so nicely. But if you have ultramarine blue and quinacridone rose, you can create that pigment yourself. Or that paint mixture, I guess, is the more correct way of saying that. And it looks beautiful if you're going for a very fantastical saturated skin palette, which I love. I love really leaning into that saturation. So I painted the shadows that way, and that helped marry them with the base color, that red warm pink color, and then it still added some coolness there. So it ended up feeling very pinky, rosy, and violety for her skin, which I liked a lot. That was my plan, was to have it that way, which I have my plans before I start watercolor painting, but it very often varies from that as I actually build up the layers, as I'm using the paints that I have, rather than I often do my color comps digitally, so they don't always transfer one to one, and I'm actually okay with that. It allows me to have a plan of attack and an understanding of where the colors are going to be, but then it lets me get a little bit more creative as I'm working on it. I don't feel so trapped in a plan that I've already created. I could just play with it a little bit more. And I used some acrylic gouache. Basically, it's just matte acrylic paint, but I used black for her dress. I've been kind of switching between that black gouache and black ink for areas that I want to actually be very, very dark and rich and black. And I haven't quite decided which one's my favorite. I don't use watercolors. I find that they just have a lot of issues with laying consistently when it becomes a really dark pigment like this. And these two options I find preserve that quality that I want pretty well. I just haven't decided yet. There are benefits to both the The acrylic gouache can be layered a lot more thickly, so if I do need it to be its full potency, then I have that in my arsenal. It also allows me to cover things up. But the ink just has a really beautiful velvety texture once it's applied to the paper. So they have their pros and their cons. But yeah, I use the acrylic gouache for her dress and for any of the other black details in this painting. I usually try to stick to one of those throughout an entire painting so that the sheen and the quality of that black detailing, it's the same throughout the painting. I painted the hair. That was pretty straightforward. I actually just used the same pigments, only at a higher concentration for the shadows. I wanted it to have kind of a luminous quality to it, so I wanted it to preserve the same color throughout, so I just leaned into that. I didn't add any like blues or purples to darken and give it like a shadow color. I just kept it, again, very pure to that warm pink that I chose. And working on this heart was so much fun. It was so much fun. So I painted the base layer in watercolors first with this cooler pink so it could really pop out from the rest of the painting. It would differentiate from her eyes and her hair, but also her skin since it's so much more saturated. And then I used my acrylic gouache again, but this time I used, I think it was mostly opera pink, which is a very, very saturated, basically fluorescent paint color. I used that for the line work. Now I reserve that kind of technique for very small areas because it can be very transparent, so it can take a lot of layers to layer the line work so that it's opaque enough to have the impact that I want. I've made the mistake of trying to do this kind of effect for like hair line work, so a really bright and light line work in the hair, but it ended up taking an eternity to get it down, and it also ended up being a lot thicker of a line weight than I wanted. So yeah, for now I've sworn off of that because my white acrylic paint is just not, it's not opaque enough. So we're gonna step away from that for a bit, but I loved it in the effect of this heart. It did allow me to get that look that I wanted, but again, I could do it a lot quicker and I could get it the way that I wanted. And then it came time to add in all the final details. So the spiky crown that she has, and then the ribbon. I wasn't actually sure what color I was going to do the ribbon until the very end. And sometimes that's just the way it is. When I get to the final and I have something that hasn't been painted yet, when I see it as the paper white quality against the rest of it, I've grown attached to it as that for the entirety of the painting. So I chose to keep it that way. I just tidied up the edges. I added a little bit of a cast shadow where the ribbon overlapped itself, so it gave it a little bit more three-dimensionality, but basically I kept it as is. I didn't do a lot of work past that, and I liked that effect because it was the only area in the painting that was quite that white. Oh, and I forgot to mention, in the background, I mixed a little bit of I think it was just like a sparkle paint. I should look up what exactly it is. I actually really like it a lot, but it's from Daniel Smith. It's one of the tubes that just has like a silvery glitter in it and a little bit of a binder. It adds a beautiful sheen to non-special effect paints. So that worked really well for the background, just to add that glint to it, a little bit extra. And a quick reminder, this original painting is looking for a new home. She's titled Pink Heart. There's a link down in the description that'll take you over there to my shop. And she is, again, the exclusive print for February. So all of my February patrons who are signed up by February 29th will get her shipped to you the following month, so in March. So thank you guys so much for watching. I am very excited about this painting. I had a lot of fun with her, and it was a fun February painting. I love doing things themed around Valentine's Day. And I know it's not early enough for you guys to get it in your hands before Valentine's Day, but I was really feeling it when I was working on it. So that's it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.